This is a WCBA.TV production. Colonel Oscar Poole speaking from right here in East Ellijay, Georgia, 75 miles north of Atlanta. I want today to talk about Robert C. Byrd, the late Senator Robert C. Byrd, a man that I knew 60 years ago. He was buried just 2 days ago. I think they're in Washington. They had his funeral in Charleston, West Virginia, from whence my wife has come. I brushed history. In May of 1950, as I said 60 years ago, when Robert C. Byrd was a student in the same class, John Young's class, history class, there at the Morris Harvey College, which is now the University of Charleston, just across the river from the Kanawha River, from the Capitol building of West Virginia. Robert Byrd was a delegate in the House of Delegates there. He was in the infancy of his career. So, you see, I have the feeling of brushing with history. Like the day I sat down with Harry S. Truman in Independence, Missouri for 15 minutes and had a private audience with him. Here was Robert C. Byrd, the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. Now, he was a friend of the family, the Schock family, Harry Schock. Harry would go to churches and sing, and I've never heard anybody say this, but I knew that Robert C. Byrd was a member of the Gideons, giving out Bibles. Now, Mr. Byrd had some dark experiences like I have. He belonged to the Klan, and he led the filibuster against the Civil Rights Act. Many people don't realize that. But here was a man who served the longest in history of any man in the U.S. Senate. Well, he wasn't a senator then. He was just getting started. And I watched his career. He was also in the House home of Glenn and Peggy Morton. You know, Robert Byrd played the fiddle, and of course Glenn plays the banjo. And I recall what I think Peggy, Glenn's wife, prepared roast beef, and they had a great time together there in their house there near Charleston. Well, I just thought I ought to record some thoughts about Robert C. Byrd and what he said. Now, what he said might be more important than anything he has done. He gave to us the 7-cycle view of history. He was the greatest Roman scholar I ever knew or ever heard. In fact, that speech he gave on the floor of the U.S. Senate against the Gulf War, I followed very closely, and it was a masterpiece speech. He was an orator of the first class. Now, I have preached this sermon, the 7-cycle view of history, that he presented that day. And if you can visualize a zigzag 7 times, up, down, up, down, up, and down, the rise and fall of mankind or civilization. Now, as I remember, I think he talked about the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Grecians, the Romans, and I can't think of one of them. He came down to Western man, European, and the migration westward since the 1500s. That's us. Here we are, Western man, the 7th, and I'm going to raise a question. Is this the final stage of civilization? or of mankind. I don't want it to be. I hope it's not. But when I see these people cutting off heads, and I even hate to bring it up because it's so gross. There are people out to destroy, especially the entire Christian race, the radicals. I hope that they're all those folks, that the Muslims are not rising up to destroy us. If they are, we're in a sad shape. Now, are we going to ascend or descend? Robert Byrd said that day that here we are in the Western civilization. Either man will rise to the highest, he will ascend to his highest development, or he will fall to the lowest abyss of his existence, comparing mankind to the caveman. Will we retrogress or progress? Will we move forward or move backwards? We are at a crisis. Now, the word crisis means a decisive turning point, a time of decision. We've got to stop and look and listen and decide which way we're going. I see some terrible signs, especially in our economy and in our government, that man is going downward. And I don't want that to be, because you see, I am an eternal optimist. Now, I've lived 80 years, or approximately 1/3 of our nation's history. We're 244 years of age, our beloved country, where man has enjoyed freedom and prosperity and good health. And here we are. Shall we continue as we are, or shall we ascend or descend? Now, I went to a science seminar over at the University of Georgia, UGA, put on by some UCLA scientists in 1974. You see, even though I was a preacher or a minister, I had a very keen interest in science, especially nuclear science and quantum physics. And they said, based upon the present scenarios, that man had until 2020 to do his thing. Well, folks, this is 2010. It's just 10 years away until 2020. Now, I didn't say that. They did. These scientists from UCLA at the University of Georgia in 1974. Well, that's been 26 and 10. That's been 36 years ago. Only a few years after I had met Robert C. Byrd. Well, you can think what you want to about Robert Byrd. He was a brilliant man and legend in West Virginia. My family reveres him. He was the king of pork. He had more pork up there in that state than you can shake a stick at. But you know who gave him that pork? He received that pork from the federal government, from the several states. In other words, New York or Florida, Georgia, right here in Georgia, or Idaho. The other states put money into West Virginia. Now, if you were are a West Virginian, I suppose you like that. Who wouldn't like handouts? The handouts, that's what it amounted to. And our government has been run by pork. Now, we are against that. I, Colonel Poole, am against pork. In fact, I've carried pork back to Washington 13 successive years from our little roadside barbecue here, which has now expanded. We've carried pork back 13 years to the U.S. Senate. That's one of our claims to fame. I'm talking about destruction as over its construction. There are people who want to tear down, destroy what already is, what ingenuity and invention have created. Look at the history of America. 244 years. We have produced Einstein. Well, of course, he came here from Germany, but he found his home over here. He was rejected over there by his kinsmen and came here and flourished right. And aren't we glad? The atomic bomb was discovered here. The Manhattan Project of 1945. Well, Mike Cox, a local man. Mike is an inventor. He spent 27 years, I think he spent 27 years in the Air Force, and very scientifically acute. He knows his science, and he says it's very scary because there are people out there, the Russians are still around, and the Mideast, and many brilliant people who are set on destruction. He told me of one thing about how a missile could be launched from a ship that could blow up the atmosphere, here or there, anywhere. Because, as you know, time or space is not limited anymore. We can now travel the whole world well, how soon? It takes an hour and a half to go around in the spaceship, but I'm told that there are elements that can travel faster than that. Can you imagine? Well, since that day, in May of 1950, when I heard Robert Byrd speak about the seven-cycle view of history, we've had the cell phones, we've had, of course, television, we've had all forms of media, we've had instant communication, and while I'm at it, how faster can you get than instant? I don't know how, as far as speed's concerned, how much faster. It makes my head twirl. I don't know how fast we need to go or could go. But cell phones, even tape recorders. Now, tape recorders are now old-fashioned. Digital, of which I'm recording on this morning, here in East LJ. Wow. Facebook, satellites. Oh, the roll call is big. Walmart has come about. Lowe's and all these, and McDonald's. They weren't even around in 1950. Whole world, a whole new world. We have been on the ascendancy. But are we at a crisis in history? What if? I think of what if. What if the government would get off our backs and let free enterprise and capitalism, of which I'm a part. I have a small business which has grown extensively. I believe in growth of the economy in a free way. Free enterprise, not the government. Now we are in a mad race, it looks like, a mad race to destruction here in the United States as far as the federal government's concerned. Take over. Handouts. How are you going to hand out when you've got nothing to hand out? Those of us who are conservatives believe that it must stop, because we'll give away the store. There'll be no store left to give away. Well, this raises so many questions. What if man could rise, could ascend? And that's what I want to believe. Count me on that side. I'm an optimist, as I say, and sometimes I wonder if we can solve our problems. Do I have moments like that? Yes, I sometimes do. I wonder if we can solve these problems. A $13 trillion debt, and added it onto that and piled on. And some say we'll have and before long we'll have a $20 trillion debt. Are we going to spend ourselves broke? You know, you can do that, because I have in times past until I learned better. I was a very difficult circumstance once in my life, and I was less than broke. I was $35,000 in the hole when we went to inaugurated our barbecue place. Let me get on. This raises questions. I like to dream. I like to think. What if? What if we can go forward or upwards, not downwards? What if we can ascend? We have many problems. Energy, for example. We have many problems and few solutions. But there are plenty of people who are creative geniuses who can receive revelation knowledge. Now, the Bible talks about revelation knowledge, knowledge that is superimposed upon man. Where did all these ideas come from? Well, I have a view of they came from God, the Spirit within man. And there are many minds thinking right now who are offering solutions, and the government has held them back. There are solutions to the oil crisis. There are solutions. But the government stepped in and tried to raise taxes and call that solution. How about communication? How about travel? Space travel. I don't suppose I'll ever go into space, although I remind you, I'm in outer space right now. I'm on spaceship planet Earth. How much more spaced out can you get than being on the Earth? We're out in space, traveling around and round and round at 26,000 miles per hour. How about food? There's talk now of herbal and organic foods. And boy, I love those fresh eggs that come from our son's farm down there in Riverdale, Georgia. He has an organic farm, and the eggs we get are so tasty. What if man can? How about health? Health care. What about being healthy and not getting sick? Well, what if? I see my time is about over, but back to that ascendancy, or the 7 cycles of history. Man, Western man, that's us, are at the point of decision. Where shall we go? Upwards or downwards? Shall we ascend to the highest form of our existence, or plunge, descend to our lowest? Well, I hope we continue and can snap out of these problems we're into right here in July of 2010 and ascend. I was so impressed with that 7-cycle view of history, and I've preached it many times. And I offer that to you today. It's relevant. It is just as, in fact, more so. That was 60 years ago, which is hard to believe. 60 years ago, I heard Robert Byrd speak about the 7-cycle view of history. Shall man ascend or descend? Friend, you and I hold the reins in the way we decide which way shall we go, upwards or downwards. You have been listening to WCBA.TV. What the mind can conceive, the heart believe, you can achieve. This is Colonel Oscar Poole speaking, and this has been a WCBA.TV production.